Welcome to the You on the Camino de Santiago podcast, Season 3. This podcast is for and about people getting ready for their first ever pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago in Spain, France, and Portugal. With your host, Camino guide and longtime pilgrim, Nancy Reynolds of the Camino Experience. Hey, guess what, pilgrims? No matter how much you plan and prepare for your Camino, there still will be surprises. Things you didn't expect or see coming. Ups and downs you could not have foreseen. Maybe even plot twists. Hi, this is Nancy, and in this episode we will be hearing from two pilgrims who you met in Season 2, Episodes 8 and 9, Andrea and Jason. They walked the Camino Francés in May and June this year, and they are here to tell you all about their experience. What I love about this episode is how honest they are in sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly, as Andrea calls it. It wasn't a walk in the park. There were some really tough times and things they definitely would do differently if they were to walk the Camino again. Our conversation reminds me that this is a pilgrimage. It's not meant to be a walk in the park. There is no one right way to do it. And you won't get it right out of the gate. Walking the Camino is a journey. It begins the moment you say yes and continues on long after you reach Santiago de Compostela. As Andrea and Jason share their experiences, I encourage you to take it all with some perspective. Ask yourself, what can I learn from this? What experience do I want to have? And perhaps even more important, check in to see if you are even planning the same walk that they did. Maybe you will be walking a different route, or maybe you will walk a part of your chosen route rather than the, quote, entire route. And I put the word entire in quote marks because regardless of how far you walk, you will be doing an entire pilgrimage, if that is your heart's intention. I am so grateful to have been able to meet Andrea and Jason on the trail, not once, but 3 times. They are both such beautiful people and such an inspiration to me. I hope you will feel the same. Before we get to our conversation, I have just a couple things to update you on. On Friday, September 1st, I will be opening registration for all of my 2024 Camino Francés Getting Started groups. If you are on my email list, you will be getting information about that by email, including a special offer for anyone who signs up by Sunday, September 3rd, which is my birthday. When you join my email list, I will also send you a copy of my Camino Planning Roadmap, which, by the way, is the roadmap I use with my groups and with the DIY, do-it-yourself, Camino Planning Program I will be introducing in mid-September. See, that roadmap is pretty generic, but you are unique. So when you join one of my groups, we work together to personalize the roadmap and your Camino plans. And we do that by diving deeply into every topic on the roadmap together. To get the roadmap and join my email list, simply follow the link in the show notes. And if you are listening on Audible and you can't click through the link, you can just copy and paste it into your web browser. Now, the other update is about the webinar I mentioned in the last episode, the one that's coming up on September 15th and 16th. I am excited to share with you that I will be launching my DIY, do-it-yourself Camino Planning Program that weekend, and anyone who attends the webinar will get first access and a special offer. And the other update on that is that the Saturday webinar will be at 9 a.m. instead of 10 a.m., as I said in last week's episode. And that's so that we can accommodate as many time zones as possible. The one on Friday, September 15th, will be at 5 p.m. Now, those are both California time, by the way. And finally, I will reveal the topic for that webinar in next week's episode. For now, I'll just say that if you are in the early stages of planning your Camino, you won't want to miss this webinar. If you are listening to this episode after September 16th, 2023, you can find out all the current stuff that's going on my website, thecaminoexperience.com. Now, let's say hello to Andrea and Jason. Hey, guys.
Hi, Nancy. So
Hi,
good to
Nancy.
see you.
It's great to see you both. I have been dying to know how your Camino turned out because we got to see each other in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port and then again in Pamplona. And then
And in Roncesvalles.
Oh, that's right. Right. Yeah. And I got to hear from you the whole way, but I haven't heard from you since you finished, except for we made it, we're home, and we're glad we're home. So just a reminder that Andrea and Jason were with me in season 2, episodes 8 and 9. And so if you want to listen to the pre-Camino story, as well as all the incredible questions they asked that I know you were all waiting to get the answers to, those are 2 great episodes to listen to. But now we get to hear what happened and how it all went. And they have promised me the good, the bad, and the ugly. So let's get to that. How about we start with putting the pin in the map? Would you remind us where you started, where you finished, and how long you took to walk the Camino?
We started in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and we ended up in Santiago de Compostela, walked the Camino Francés, and it took us 31 days with not really a stop in there, but we couldn't walk for a few days because we both got sick. That's part of the bad and the ugly part. But it was 5 days in the middle of there that we had to skip ahead day by day because we'd already booked our reservations. So we had 5 days sick in a cab from town to town.
Oh, what fun.
That definitely wasn't part of the plan.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? There always are things that aren't part of the plan. And you both did some pretty diligent planning, yes?
Very
much
diligent
so.
planning. And that was part of the experience of the Camino, is really to realize that no matter how much research you do or planning in advance, you have to adapt and adjust. And we were certainly surprised by many things that we found once we showed up.
Oh, wow. I want to hear all about those, but let's start with the good. Let's start with, what did you love about walking the Camino?
Well, Andrea and I started our pilgrimage on May 16th, leaving from New York. They say when you step out your front door, that's when you're beginning your pilgrimage. And that was our 2-year anniversary from our first date. And
I got chills.
And since then, we knew we were already on our own personal pilgrimage through life together. And in April, we went to Puerto Rico for Andrea's birthday, and I proposed and surprised her, and she said yes. So it was sort of like, I don't know, the Camino felt like it brought us together even closer than we were before. And, we both feel that it was sort of like emblematic of our marriage. It was like, oh, this was, you can say for rich or for poor, through sickness or in health, but then you get out on the Camino and you go through, rich moments and not so rich moments and sickness. And we did not have one disagreement. We were in complete lockstep the whole way. Because it's a real, test on an individual level.
Sure.
But then to do it together, I think that was, for me, it brought us, closer together than we thought we could.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And I said to Jason that it felt like a rite of passage into married life. And I celebrate that with all of my heart. My brother joked with us that if he had done this with his wife, it would take them 50 meters to get into a fight. We only strengthened that sense of partnership and companionship and support with each other. So that was really special. And I really enjoyed the segments and the stretches when we were really out in the wild, in nature, away from highways, away from the industrial suburbs, and that we could really connect with the landscape around us, with the wild animals. We saw some pretty cool wild animals along the way. So that was my favorite part. I kind of hoped for more. There were long stretches, as you know, of, you know, the surroundings are not so pleasant to be in, but when they are phenomenal.
Isn't that the truth? Yeah. So some would argue that that's the nature of pilgrimage, is
Yep.
that it's not meant to be a scenic tour. It's not meant to be a walk in the park. It's meant to have some of the challenges and some of the less pretty parts. So how did you deal with those when you came across those?
Buckle up and keep going.
That's right. Just
I
push
think
through.
thankfully also with a sense of humor, So
Yeah.
I think we had a balance of like giving each other space, because there were moments when we felt grumpy or really tired or, stressed by the traffic or by the noise or by the circumstances we were facing. And when you need that time and that space, we were able to provide that to each other. But we would also, sing and make jokes and just put the sense of humor to work to get through those moments.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to put your head down and grin and bear it. I can't remember where exactly we were on the Camino, but it was a long stretch of walking next to the highway, and it started to rain. Rain is fine. It's being next to the highway when it's pouring down rain. And Andrea did not wait one sec. She's like, I'll see you there. I'm like, I can't keep up. She's,
She's fast and
like
strong.
4 inches shorter than I am, but her stride and her pace was just so we get there and wring out your clothes and stuff like that. But it's just sometimes it's about supporting one another, and sometimes it's about just self-preservation in a light way. It's not like, screw you, I'm going to save myself. It was more like the only way I can get through this is to barrel through.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're at different places energy wise on days. So one would slow down, one would speed up, depending. That was the, part of the good part. It was that we were compromising what we might have done to get through. But yeah, grin and bear it.
Mm.
And also know, while we were doing it, when you're on a pilgrimage, yes, exactly to your point, there's going to be tough times. And that's the only way that you're going to learn anything about yourself and learn anything about one another. But in the moment, it couldn't be more unpleasant. It's only in hindsight do you find the reward in the tough times. And so
good
when there are
point.
plentiful of rough times, then you're going, oh, I can't wait till this is over so I can reflect on this and go, oh, wasn't that great? Didn't I learn that?
I love that. But it's really important to note that it's not the walk in the park. There will be difficult times.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, I think that was one of the, with all of the research that we did, listening to your podcast. I mean, we listened to every episode and maybe a couple of times before we left. And then there are people on YouTube, have YouTube channels that we watch. You're not going to show video or talk about, I mean, you would, talk about all the ups and downs, but you don't see, like on YouTube, the times you're walking by the highway for 3 hours in the rain. So that kind of, even if it was said, it wasn't put into our brain. So there was that was kind of a surprise, even though we had heard, oh, it's going to be rough sometimes, or the elevation goes up or the elevation goes down. And that's another thing that was tricky is, after Roncesvalles, that's not the end of the difficult. That it might be the most challenging part on day one.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of opportunities for it to be just as grueling, particularly because you aren't just starting.
Mm-hmm.
You might be day 20 in, and you're going down a steep incline on boulders that are very misshapen. You're going over large rocks, small rocks, pebbles, sand, mud, and on the steep angle, if you don't have trekking poles, ladies and gentlemen, you're screwed. Because you use those trekking poles with lifeline.
We after Zubiri, we were like, okay, we need knee braces. And
Yeah.
for the listeners that don't know, Zubiri is like after Zubiri it would be the third day. And the first thing we did in the morning was find a pharmacy and get knee braces. And I think that was one of the misleading concepts that I had personally. And I heard it even from our host in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. People would say, oh, Roncesvalles is the toughest day, is the toughest climb. It's the first day, right? Mm-hmm. And then after that, it gets easier. And for us, it didn't. For me personally, I think I had the expectation that after the first week, my body would adapt. It would get used to the backpack. And it didn't. In fact, it was a cumulative effect of tiredness and pain and soreness. And like all the way to the last day, I didn't get quote unquote used to the long hours of walking and to the toll that it takes in your body to do that.
That brings up a really great point, though, especially for people who think, oh, I'll just train on the trail. Well, I've done that. And it kind of works, but it doesn't always work, and it doesn't work for everyone. And so the surprise is that you have to discover for yourself what the experience of walking long hours is.
Yeah. And then so the training on the trail point brings me to, I think, like the biggest surprise for us was how shocked people seemed to be when we said that we were doing the whole Camino in 31 days. So if you look at the, guides that are out there, some of the most popular guides, they break the Camino down into 31 stages. Mm-hmm. And we were naive to think that, well, if this is what the guide recommends, we can do it. I think it's very aggressive to do the, 780 kilometers or 500 miles in 31 days. And if you have 40, 50, 60 days and you're doing shorter miles, or if you don't do the full Camino from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Santiago and you do it in chunks, or you just choose to do, a portion of it, I think you get maybe the benefit of letting your body get used to it over time and you can be more relaxed. We really committed to doing, end to end in 31 days. And Jason mentioned that we had to skip a segment when we were sick and that we ended up taking cabs to kind of make up for the lost time. And still, even though we did that, we had plenty of days that we had to do more than 30 kilometers in a day, and it was brutal.
Wow. Yeah, those long days are hard.
Yeah, when I describe it to friends, we walk 6 to 8 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And they'd say, well, what was it like? And I say, well, you'd get up and you have a cup of coffee and a piece of toast, because that's all you can get at that time of morning. And I thought, oh, surely there's something. Nope, it is, if you're lucky, if you're not up too early, because there were a couple of times that we asked, can we get coffee at, 7? I know you don't open until 8, but can we get coffee at 7? Because we weren't even leaving that early, like 6 a.m. Have coffee. So, and then you walk for 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Then you have second breakfast, which is almost always and exclusively the tortas, maybe another croissant. and sometimes you might find a piece of fruit. It was just, the pickings were a lot slimmer for food than I thought. Mm-hmm. So then after that second breakfast, then you walk for another 2.5 hours. Then you stop for lunch, and then you walk for another 2.5 hours. And eventually we got this break was for ice cream and a Caz Lemon or a Diet Coke to get through the last 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And then you drag your butt into the town, sit down and have 2 beers. And then you're like, and then you're exhausted.
Yeah.
So there wasn't much time there really kind of literally wasn't time to, I don't know, stop and see something that I thought I would see along the way. In my mind, these little towns were maybe more picturesque than they actually were. And maybe there was going to be something you could, stop and have a snack or something. I mean, you could stop and have a snack, but it was still the same kind of very limited menu of things along the way. So you get in and then you're just exhausted and all you want to do is eat and go to bed.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear that. You get up, you walk, you eat, you go to bed, you get up and you repeat that. But that's truly exclusively what it is until you're in a big town like León or Logroño or Burgos, where you can, if you have energy, go out for a couple of hours before you want to go to bed. So it was, and then my friends, their jaws drop, and it's hard because you want to be truthful, like the way we want to be truthful with you and your listeners. At the same time, I enjoyed it overall. It wasn't like, oh, why did I do that? That was the most horrible time of my life. And exactly backing into your point, that's what a pilgrimage is, ups and downs. And at the end of it all, then you sort of calculate its worth to you.
Mm.
One of the things that I would suggest to, friends, and if anybody asks for my opinion or advice, would be to plan 0-kilometer days in some of these more interesting towns.
Sure.
Estela, Logroño, Burgos, Pamplona. Just take the time, if you can afford to take the time, to just spend a full day because they are the most interesting places where you would have perhaps a museum or a better restaurant to go to and plazas, and to just take in the towns. We didn't have the time to do that. And Jason pointed out that even if we got to the town with some time to spare, we were just so tired from the walk that you don't really want to go explore and put in more steps than what you already did.
All you want to do is be horizontal on your bed.
That's right.
That's it. Horizontal time. Yeah. So if we look at this from a planning perspective, when you planned your 31-day itinerary, did you think about what your rest days would be, 0 days or rest days, or did you simply make a walking plan?
So we didn't plan rest days because, again, we were going by the guides, and the guides have no break days. And we, had commitments at home that we had to be back to. So it's like 31 days is what we have. We're going to break it down according to the guides. And we, in the beginning, we felt that maybe staying off stages, and for the benefit of the listeners that don't know what that is, in the guides, they recommend the towns where you spend the night. And we were trying to either spend the night in the town before that or stretch and spend the night in the town after that to avoid like more crowded accommodations. But there were a couple of things that happened that I think changed the way that we thought about it. One is after 3 nights in shared dorms, in albergues and bunk beds, we looked each other in the eye and say, we're not cut out for this.
I love it.
So we decided to stay in private rooms with private bathrooms where we could find them, because it wasn't always possible. And I want to emphasize this, they are, they kind of not so plentiful. So we couldn't always find that. But we also realized that to increase our chances to have that private room, we had to book in advance, considering how busy the Camino was when we were there. So that kind of forced us into the decision to book our rooms several days in advance. So we kind of had locked in how many miles we were going to walk until we got to our destination where we had a reservation. And then the other thing that we ended up making an adjustment on was we pretty much settled for the stages, because what we realized is the towns that are recommended as the end of a stage are recommended as the end of a stage for a reason.
For a reason,
They
exactly.
have pharmacies and ATMs and, better restaurants or food options, more options of accommodations.
Yeah.
So over time, and the other thing is, to Jason's point, the small little towns, they don't really feel that interesting, no offense, but we felt like we would be better off sticking with the stages. And to make a long answer short, we ended up planning during the Camino our
Okay.
stays and booking rooms, but we hadn't planned any rest days going into it. We had the forced rest days when we got sick and we were basically sleeping for 5 days.
Wow.
I think we had COVID just the way that, because I had it before there was any vaccination back in 2020, and the feeling that you get after you get a shot, that's what I felt like. The cough that didn't go away, until like maybe even last week. It just stuck around. So it was an upper respiratory infection. I had it for 2 days, and then Andrea had it for 2 days, and then on the fifth day, we were just like, okay, let's walk 6 kilometers to see how we feel, and can we get back into it? And then we started up again. And I think, however we got it, the breakdown of our system came from, I think we did at least we did a 30 plus kilometer day the day before we got sick.
Okay.
And then there was a torrential rainstorm, and it got really, really cold out of the blue. So we're like, oh, maybe we're just a little sick, and then just wiped us out.
Mm. Yeah. And I have a theory that with COVID, if you try to exercise or do more activity than usual when you have COVID, my theory is that it grabs on tighter. It just kind of sticks with you. Yeah. Yeah. Because I actually brought home a souvenir case of COVID from my trip this year. Yeah. And it was a solid 3 weeks before I had my energy back. Yeah. And after about 2 weeks, I decided to go kayaking for about an hour, and I was wiped out for 3 days. So, who knows? Who knows? Yeah. But yeah, that's a plot twist.
Yeah. It's hard to tell when you're doing such aerobic and strenuous, and we were both in really good shape, so we thought this would be easy, but then, because that was day 12, right, babe? And so then we had all the rest of, 19 days ahead of us. So it was probably added to the discomfort of the trip.
It was also a blessing in disguise, in hindsight. It really forced us to stop and rest. And for me, there was a major shift that says my body has a wisdom and it has a voice that I should and need to listen to more. So when I'm tired, I'll stop. If I am hot, I will look for a way to cool down. If it takes me longer to get to my destination, fine. But pushing through the signs of my body that were saying, you're pushing me too far, it would get me nowhere, right?
Right. Yeah. It'll actually put you on the bench.
I don't know if Jason relates to this, but after we got sick and then, started walking again, I was definitely more relaxed.
Okay. So that's interesting. There's sort of a pressure or a stress to keep going and to meet the distance each day. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, there is this drive that it's like, let's not take an extra 5 or 10 minutes, because that means an extra 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the day that, is pushing into later in the afternoon. And you just want to get to your destination so that you can have that beer, you can have that food, you can have that shower. And listen, it's a motivator. Don't get me wrong.
I'm with you.
It's a motivator. But you say, you know what, Arif, if I get there half an hour later or an hour later, but have a more pleasant journey while I'm walking, and to just really take care of your bodies, you're asking them for a lot.
Yes. And carrying a backpack, because you both carried your backpacks the whole way. Yeah,
we did. And we were incredibly, I'm very proud of what we did going into it. We were very diligent with what we packed, and, really kept the backpacks to a minimum. We had one change of clothes. We shared toiletries so that we were not, carrying extra ounces. Because as Nancy would say, ounces add up to pounds, and pounds piece you up. So our backpacks couldn't be lighter. And after we decided to stay in private rooms, we stopped at Puente La Reina and went to the post office and shipped the sleeping bags that we had packed from home. So that created extra room and made the backpacks lighter. So that was really smart that we did that. But even with a super light backpack, it was challenging to, carry it for the full way. And maybe another hint or tip for the listeners is, if you feel like you need to bring more than like one change of clothes and just the bare essential toiletries with you, use the shipping services from town to town, because not carrying that backpack, I think, would make a huge difference on your experience.
Yeah.
Not to mention your knees.
Right? Your knees, your hips, your feet, all of it takes a toll.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We saw people having backpacks that looked like they were going to camp out. They were so huge. And people who were doing shorter walks than we were, they were older. Maybe they just felt like they needed to have however much stuff they needed to have, they had it on their back. And I didn't know how they were doing it.
Yeah.
But we were kind of blowing past those people. Not, we just had this 31 day. And some people, we met this lovely couple from South Carolina who had sold their house, were retired, and didn't know where they were going to move. So all their stuff was in storage, and whatever they were bringing on their back was and they were going to stay as long as it took.
Wow.
But there were people that had the opportunity to take 0 days on the fly.
Yeah.
Which seemed to be like, oh, that's very ideal. But unfortunately, we gave ourselves 5 weeks, 2.5 or 3 days on either side to get to Spain and back home from Spain. And then the 31 days on the Camino solid. So we thought we had given ourselves plenty of time. Yeah. Yeah. Lightening the backpack was a huge thing to do for us.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that, yes, you can carry that weight, but you're going to have a better experience if you carry less.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever that starting point is, yeah, I'm sure you could do it. And many people will say, no, I got this 20 pounds or however many kilos that is. No problem. Yes, you can do it, but the toll on the body will be less if you carry less.
More power to them. And
right?
Yes. And what we considered actually starting using the shipping services, but we had packed so little because I was like, okay, even if you're shipping your bag, while you're on the trail, you probably want to have a pair of flip-flops.
Mm-hmm.
You want to have some water and some sunscreen. You might want to have
rain gear
and a light backpack, because we always started the morning with like 3 layers. By midday, you shedding all those layers. So long story short, I almost felt like if I were to pack a smaller bag, I would be pretty much repacking my entire backpack with the exception of like a pound or 2.
Yeah.
So at that point, it didn't feel like it would make a huge difference for us.
Yeah.
But I agree with you that, if I would say if your backpack leaving home, it's that rule of like 10% of your body weight. We had less than 10% of our body weight leaving home. With the water, it was about 10% of our body weight, and it was absolutely the limit for me.
And neither one of you is very big, right? You're both in great shape and on the lean side. So yeah. One tip for not for you guys, because you've already walked, but for the listeners is when you're walking with a couple or a group or people who you are absolutely certain you're going to the same places every day, what you can do is buy an extra small, inexpensive bag once you get to Spain, and each of you offload a few pounds and send that one bag ahead. Still carry your backpack with all those essentials, but you don't need the toiletries during the day, and you don't need, a couple other things. So that's one of the tricks that I've done.
I think that's a great idea. And for what it's worth, we would arrive at albergues and see the bags there. and see, as we pass through towns, the trucks and vans
Yeah,
picking up the bags. It's a very reliable service from what we could tell, even though we didn't
definitely.
experience them directly. Yeah.
I've used them ever since I started leading groups in 2012. I always use luggage transport, and it has been incredibly reliable. So highly recommended if that helps people complete the journey.
Yeah. And to do it, enjoying it while you're doing it.
That's a good goal.
You're probably going to curse every once in a while. I mean, sometimes I saw people who were not in great shape and who are older, and even when they're walking in town, looks like it might be difficult to get around, just the way, and it's probably just cumulative from how much they've been walking. But to go down these steep inclines, and I'm not declines, I'm not trying to discourage anybody from doing it, but it was a lot more challenging, because I remember leave before we left and doing the research, hearing about people of all ages doing it. And I thought, oh, well, that's great. It's going to be easier if people of all ages can do it. Well, all people, people of all ages who really have, are determined to do this and, make sacrifices in their comfort. I'm very athletic. I've always really loved challenges and sweating and getting into difficult, strenuous situations. And I thought, oh, it's probably not going to be nearly as bad as some other things that I've done, like hiking the Grand Canyon or anything like that, or the Himalayas. And it really surprised me. I felt it was going to be more, not paths, like rail trails or anything like that. Yeah, it was the surprise factor for me.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to note is that there's a variety of terrain. So there are those long stretches when you're right on the highway, and there are a couple times when there are semi trucks whizzing by you, and there's the trail that's super steep and full of scree and loose rocks, and that lasts for 4 kilometers. Or there's that descent into Molina Seca that is just that.
Yes, Molina Seca. Oh my God.
Either people haven't mentioned it or people forget, and then they go, what was that? No one told me about that. Yeah. So we're mentioning it now. The descent into Molina Seca from Manjarin, I think it is. Yeah.
Monjardin.
Let's just say from the Cross of Iron, Cruz de Ferro.
That's right. It's after Foncebadon, and then you keep going down. I can mention something. That was the other aspect of the guides. Maybe we didn't read them closely enough, but that I want to share with the listeners is when you look at the itinerary and the mapping of the route, there are little dots, right, that show where you will come across a pueblo or a little village.
Yeah.
And I had made the assumption that those dots represented a bathroom, some shade, a place to buy food, or, refill my water. That's not always the case. In fact, I would say rarely that's the case. You might pass, a little village where you see farm homes or barns at the distance, but it doesn't mean that there is any infrastructure there to support the pilgrims. So you have to be prepared for pretty long stretches, and I mean hours, where you don't have a place to buy food, you don't have a bathroom to go to, you don't have a place to sit down unless you sit down right on the trail. You may not have shade or shelter from the rain. So those little dots are misleading. Yeah, you're going to see some kind of like man-built, facility, but they are not necessarily open for pilgrims or supporting the pilgrims.
It's a great point. Let me ask, did you use an app or a guidebook?
An app we used. I'm forgetting the name of it right now. Let's see if I can pull it up.
Buen Camino or Wise Pilgrim?
Wise Pilgrim.
Wise Pilgrim. Yeah.
And I wish I would have compared and contrast Buen Camino. Like about halfway through, I was looking at Buen Camino, and there was more tourist information, like a little more in depth about this church or about that. And Wise Pilgrim had the essentials of how many kilometers and what facilities, bathroom, pharmacy, that you might be able to find in a particular town. And a little bit, because it's newer, I think it's a newer app. And so, but it got us through, giving us the information. Yeah.
Yeah, good. And that's a really key point. I recommend to people that they compare before they go, get both the apps. There are many, but the top two that I like are Buen Camino and Wise Pilgrim, and compare them and see how you like your information presented, because not everybody reads things the same way or understands things the same way.
Yeah.
And so just to play around with those, and especially the first few days on the trail, to look at the app and see, this is what it says and this is what I'm seeing. Does it match? And how do I interpret the information? Those first few days getting to know your app are really important, I think.
Yeah, they were super helpful. And Jason, I thought of you often. And I'm going to say here before I forget that for me, one of the highlights of the Camino for sure was meeting you in person, spending time with you. It was so
That's
great.
right.
I love
And
that.
we would often, bring up your name. And one day we said, oh, remember, Nancy, in the podcast, you often talk about the superpower that you're going to bring with you to the Camino. And I was like, I wonder if we discovered any superpowers. And for me, not that I didn't know this about myself before, but speaking Spanish was a huge help. And using the app, to be able to see where we could get accommodations, and then using WhatsApp to communicate directly with the albergues in
Very
Spanish
slick.
was super helpful.
Yeah.
And in the spirit of comedy here, keeping it light, I also discovered that I can squat down and pee anywhere very fast, and that came handy. And Jason is a great hand washer of clothes. Like his sink skills were second to none.
That's a superpower to have, right?
In the Camino, it was very, very handy, pun intended.
Especially when you're staying in private rooms, you don't always have the setup that you have at the albergues for washing, hand washing and drying clothes and all that. Yeah. And then when you stay in private rooms, if it's time to put your clothes in a washing machine, it's a bit more expensive to do it at a hotel.
We stayed in private rooms in albergues, though, for the most part. So maybe that's the other thing that your listeners should know, is that the albergues that have the shared dorms with bunk beds oftentimes have one or two private rooms, not many. But because we started booking in advance, we were able to grab those. So that seemed like a good compromise, so to speak.
That's a great compromise. Yeah. So what did you think of albergue life then?
It wasn't great for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I expected them to be maybe more inviting, and the facilities are stripped down to the bare minimum. The staff is not always really like happy to see the flow of pilgrims coming in and out. It's a high volume of people that they are accommodating on a daily basis. I would often ask them, like, it's like this every day for you, isn't it? And it is. And, they're like, you're very happy to be here for a few hours. I'm here every day of every week of every month dealing with this very heavy work, because it's typically the same staff that is making the beds, it's cleaning the rooms and bathrooms, it's doing the laundry, it's cooking the food, it's serving the tables. So I think the experience of the albergues is like, listen, it's incredibly convenient. I tip my hat to them because they really put a lot of work into making everything ready for the pilgrims to show up. But what you get, in my experience, was really, a very basic level of service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and how about the price you're paying? How much those cost as compared to a hotel with, nice reception and a bar and all that stuff.
That's a great point.
Yeah, exactly. No, I was just going to say, if you're on a budget, it's definitely the way to go.
Yeah, for sure. It reminds me too, to mention how important it is to respect the opening hours of the albergues, that when they say they open at 2 in the afternoon, leave them be until 2, because they have so much work to do to get ready, to reset. They hit the reset button every single day to clean the facility, get it set, get it ready, and then open to another batch of pilgrims. Yeah. So those opening hours are pretty important.
Yeah.
I found that the albergues were more welcoming, of course, because that's what they're designed for, is to, be hosts for the pilgrims. In some of the smaller towns, there was a bit of a vibe of, oh, here come the pilgrims. We actually had one situation where, we didn't want to eat at the first bar in town. So we went to the second bar, and it was kind of tucked up in this corner of a square. And we went upstairs, and there was a large group of people who had just come from church, and it was a big place. And we, cordoned ourselves over to the side because we knew that we weren't just coming from church in a local, but they wouldn't even serve us. They didn't even come to the bar to ask us what we wanted. That only happened that once, but there's a kind of vibe at times where you feel like you're a nuisance. And I can understand, if you're on a ancient pilgrimage trail and thousands, I think we looked at the website in Santiago of how many pilgrims a day come in. It's like 2,500 pilgrims a day. Yeah. You imagine that's a wave of people every single day that's going through these small towns. Now, granted, there were all the different caminos converging on Santiago, but a lot of people. And I can hardly blame them, but also it wasn't as pleasant for our experience to feel like we were invaders or intruders.
Mm. Yeah. And it's an interesting point to look at it from both perspectives, right? So on the one hand, as Americans, we've come from a culture where customer service is required and the customer comes first. And so we come with that paradigm. And then the other perspective is the people serving the pilgrims doing it day after day after day for thousands of people, many of whom don't speak the language, many who I've witnessed, and I know this is not you, but I've witnessed so many people who don't bother to say hello and good morning, who don't bother to learn the 3 words of Spanish for coffee and wine, and who come in and who are demanding. So for me, it raises the question of, what is the pilgrim's role in all of this? How do we be good, gracious guests? And I know you too. I watched you in action. You've got it. You've got that down.
I think that's a really good point, Nancy. And, I would extend that to the trail. That was one of the heartbreaking aspects of the Camino for me, was to see how much vandalism there is in the trail. People write their names in the signs. They take the shells that mark the trail home as souvenirs. They leave posters with whatever religious or political propaganda they want to spread, and notes for their friends that are coming behind. The very basic of like taking your trash with you. You see trash on the trail. And maybe, it's a pledge from me. It's like, treat the Camino as you would treat like a historical landmark, right? And don't leave anything, don't take anything out in the trail. So for sure in the albergues, that courtesy, but also I think in the trail at large. For me, it was surprising. I think if you go in the pilgrimage, you're treating that as a sacred place. And we didn't always see that being the case.
And not to give the wrong impression, it's not like a vandalized Camino the whole way through, but when you're walking and you're looking at every single sign for directions and whatnot, and when it's disturbed, you feel kind of vandalized yourself.
Yeah, a little violated.
We were there for more of a, without being religious, spiritual experience.
Definitely.
So I felt like we're going into a church or something sacred, and we approached it as that. And as you said, a gracious guest, I think, is a really important way to approach it. Not, oh, I'm going to bring my friends and we're going to ride our bikes through the Camino. There's all kinds of energies. But for us, even the moments that we found this disrespect, it was disturbing.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And the amount of graffiti has increased tremendously. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting when you talk about the spiritual experience, there's that challenge or that invitation for us to go within when the exterior is shaking us up, whether it's the vandalism or graffiti or litter, whether it's the weather that's pounding us with rain and we're soaking wet, whether it's walking on the motorway with all the semi trucks driving by, there's that challenge to go within and say, in spite of all these circumstances, what's the journey for me? So was that on your radar at all? How did you bring out the inner journey?
That was the single most difficult, well, I mean, aside from the physical, because the physical was so demanding and it was very hard to go in. And we're people who go in all the time. And that's part of, I think, the looking back at the Camino in retrospect and finding that we somehow went inside, whether it was breathing or meditation, but that didn't really work so much for us because the physical was it was about where you can eat, where you can pee, where you're going to sleep, and how your body feels. That it was all the exterior. And Andrea had a meditation that she would do, and I was working on a meditation through music that I was writing, and our minds were cacophonous in trying to escape the outside, if that makes sense. There was no peace inside. It was almost like the internal mantra or monologue that was going on was as loud as, for me, was as loud as what was going on outside physically.
I agree. Not much to add that. And I think I was aware of the privilege that it was to be able to observe my mind and to observe myself in that way, right? As much as the struggle was real, to dedicate that kind of time, to have that amount of space, to have the support of someone like Jason in order to observe my mind like that was a true privilege that wasn't lost on me. Yeah. But, and again, some of the guides or even the Wise Pilgrim app describes the Camino as, the first third is physical, the second third of the Camino Francés, like the Saint Jean Pied de Port to Santiago journey. The first third would be more physical, about the body. The second third of the Camino is about expanding the mind and that openness of the mind. And the last third would be more about your soul and about that spiritual, maybe enlightenment or insight. I didn't experience it that way. It was physical all the way through with my mind screaming, right?
Yeah.
And I think that personal growth was very reliant on the resiliency and the persistence that I already knew that I had in myself to get through.
So again, we all bring who we are. I wear this necklace that says, no matter where you go, there you are. And that is so true on the Camino, because you went on the Camino, Andrea. Jason, you went. All of who you are went on the Camino and had the experience that you were to have, which is part of why no one, even though we think we know what the Camino is and what the experience will be, we don't until we have it.
I love that, that phrase and the way I was putting it to Jason and then shared with friends and family is like the Camino puts a magnifying glass on your personality traits, the good ones and the bad ones. And at the end, like Santiago had this very cute souvenir shop, and we allowed ourselves to shop in Santiago because we hadn't bought any souvenirs like all along, not to add weight to the backpack. But we threw our shoes away and bought new shoes. And then I saw this tote bag that said, I came looking for answers and the Camino changed my questions.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, I got chills on that one too. Oh, wow. Yeah. One of the things I got were bigger questions where I realized the ones I've been asking weren't important enough.
They weren't, right.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So here's the big question. If you were to go do it again, which you've given me no indication that you are, but I'm, who knows, what would you do differently?
We would have to, if we were to do the whole trip that we did from beginning to end of the Camino Francés, it would be to give ourselves much more time so that we can take those 0 days and take 2 or 3 and stay in a town and maybe skip the Meseta this time.
Why would you skip the Meseta?
Well, I think it's unfair for us to really judge it because we got sick right before the Meseta. And then when we got out there, we were, just trying to get through. And one stretch, oh my God, I'm just like getting not good chills thinking about it. We stayed in what do you call,
Casa Rural.
they made us sandwiches to take along and some water for the next day because we weren't going to have breakfast. And thank God, because there was nothing it seemed like we were out there for 4 or 5 hours, no shade. There was one tree that we ran across, and then there was this cinder block like bunker. It was like an old shed that had a window blown out and no door. And we went in there to eat because there was shade. But it was kind of like going into an oven that did doors open. It's not really any better than being out in the sun. We sat there and thought this can't get any worse. And then we continued on our journey. And then it was just as long as we had walked in the morning. So it's just the exposure to it all. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful in its barren. You can't really even see a mountain off in the distance. It's so flat. And I appreciate that. But given our circumstances, it was rough. And therefore we might just like take a cab next time.
I skipped the Meseta on my first Camino. And then when I finally did get to walk it, I fell in love with it. Yeah, especially in the springtime when it's green and it's just green rolling hills in every direction and fields of red poppies, which if it's raining, you don't see because your head's down and you're just trudging along. And if you aren't feeling well and all you want is to finish the day, like any day on the Camino, like any day in life, just get it done. I don't even want to participate in what I'm doing. I'm just going to do it. So what else would you do differently? Andrea, anything you'd like to chime in on?
No, this would be the first thing I would change. It's just more time if you're gonna do the full Camino. So you can have shorter days and you can have 0-kilometer days. Or if you can't afford to take more time, don't do the full Camino. Even though I think that if we had not done the full Camino Francés, I personally would have been left wondering what it would have been like, to do it. Now I know. But if it's important for you to do the whole thing and you don't have more time, maybe do it in chunks. We met a lot of people who did, a segment years ago and then came back last year and they're back now. I think, we talked about shipping the backpacks. That would be maybe something else I would consider, especially if our bags were heavier than we managed to get them to be. And I already mentioned, staying in private rooms for us made a big difference instead of staying in the shared dorms.
Jason, anything else for you?
No, I think that's exactly, we're lockstep on what we would do differently. And I think if there was a Camino in our, future, it would be something like the Portuguese that's shorter, maybe a different, it's mostly in Portugal and maybe going along the coast would provide different opportunities for food. Although I know that accommodations maybe are a little more challenging than on the Francés because it's so popular. But overall, I'm glad that we did it. We wanted to give a sort of a fair balance of our experience because oftentimes people romanticize and it's so easy. You watch The Way and you go, oh, that looks easy and fun. And why not have a big loaf of bread and some meat and wine but that's unrealistic. And you do, like you said, you don't know what it's like to walk day after day until you're doing it. Mm-hmm. It's not like, oh, I walked 3 times this week and I did 5 miles each. That's great. But you got to do it every single day. And there's no reason to do it every single day because that would be crazy in your own life. But the things that we have reflected on now that we've gotten back, things that we saw, Andrea was talking about the wild animals. I had like 3 significant moments that later on, I kind of looked up what is the meaning of this particular animal. It's not like there's a bunch of wild animals either running around. It was scarce, but we did see about a 6 foot, 7 foot snake that was about as big as my arm, that had been hit by a car and was dying in the middle of the road just outside of Estella. It was extraordinary in seeing that happen, and it just being, we didn't see the car, but we saw this snake dying, like in the throes of death. And we just
Wow.
had compassion, no fear. But it looked like a large truck tire rolled, kind of coiled up in the middle of the road. What that meant when I unpacked it for me in this particular point of my life, all the stork nests just everywhere in the spring. Andrea's like, there's another one of your stork nests. And I take a picture. I have like 1,000,000 stork nests. What that signifies in spirituality for people who are into animal meanings in symbolism. And then a wild boar coming out of the forest at one point. These things just kind of, oh my God, this is happening. Oh, isn't that beautiful? And you keep walking. You just keep going. And then when we had an opportunity to reflect on it, oh, for me, this can mean what the journey was for us in our relationship. It was all unpacking afterwards. So it's tough going, but the reward for me has been really significant.
And on a more practical note, the implied answer in what we would change is also that I think we got a lot of things right. We got the gear right. We didn't have a single blister. One tip that like we would share with other pilgrims that surprised a lot of them, we brought almond oil for our feet. So
Almond oil.
after the shower, you just put a little, very
One
small,
drop.
one or two drops of almond oil in your feet, and that hydrates. And really, I think it was miraculous for us. It really helped.
Yeah.
But we had, our shoes were comfortable. We had proper layers to warm up, but that weren't heavy. So I think a lot of the things that we got right, we would do again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting as I observe people preparing for the Camino, and especially in the Facebook groups and online forums, people are asking, what do I pack? What gear do I need? What's the best sleeping bag? What kind of trekking poles? But imagine if we spent as much time on what kind of experience do I want to have? How do I plan for the physical, mental, and emotional challenge of walking the Camino, and take those questions as seriously as what shoes do I wear? Then I think we open up some possibilities, and it won't be the same for everyone, because you both asked a lot of those questions and you had the experience you had, and the next person has the experience that they had. And yeah, I think 3 more pilgrims who I'm going to talk to who are in season 2. And I'm going to talk to them to hear about their experiences for this season. And I'm so curious to hear. I bet it will be just completely different because everybody gets a different experience.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think you're exactly right, Nancy, is that we spend so much time thinking of what shoes, what hat, what backpack. Do I need a water bladder or not? And the answer for me is no, you don't need the water bladder. Just take a bottle of water. There'll be plenty of time to fill it up. But we're not preparing ourselves. And again, and not to sound whatever this sounds like, we've already done a lot of internal work. So we thought we were prepared, and really nothing prepares you for a true pilgrimage.
Yeah.
And maybe that's for the best, but I think it's good to prepare yourself that the experience isn't just about what you're wearing and what you're eating and where it's about what you hope to get from it, I guess.
I think of it, my favorite analogy is when you're getting married and you plan the wedding, and you spend all this time planning the wedding and the reception and all the details, and forget to talk about the marriage and what happens after, And so watching you two as a couple back when we first met, and then finding out in St. Jean that you'd gotten engaged and all of that, I just watch you had the experience that you had, but you're getting from it what you're getting from it, which is the good stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's the time and the effort and the energy and the love that you put into it is allowing you to get some really great stuff out of what wasn't a beautiful walking holiday. Yay, we went to the beach.
Yeah, definitely leave some days when you get back to rest and recover because it is no restful vacation.
It's not. Yeah, it's
Need a
not.
vacation from the pilgrimage.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true, which is why some people choose to spend an extra week in Spain and maybe go to the coast, or if they love cities, spend some time in Madrid or go down to Portugal. Yeah. Yeah. I think these are things worth thinking about before you go, if you have the luxury of time.
Yeah, we ran, and when we got back, I had already dove into a work project that I had, and we ran into one of our Camino friends at this event at Tanglewood in Western Massachusetts. And she was saying that another person that we had dinner with and had a couple dinners with, she was still in Portugal.
Uh-huh.
This was like 2.5 weeks later. We might as well, you're over there and you have to rest up.
Definitely. But rest days are challenging. 0 kilometer days are challenging for another reason, because you meet people. A lot of people build a little mini community moving along the Camino. And if you take a rest day and they don't, then you've just lost them.
That's a good point. And also, of course, it makes the trip longer. I missed home.
Yeah.
I was ready to come back home too. So, there is that conflicting emotion that you want to, in a way, you want the experience to last for as long as it possibly can. And there is a side of you that's just ready to come back.
Absolutely. Which is why we asked not just how long does it take, but how long do you want to spend? Because you might not want a month or 2 months. You might want 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Again, getting back to how do you have the experience that you are longing for? All right. So anything else that you would like to share?
I'm not sure how this fits in, but the cyclists, I don't want to be prejudiced against any group, but boy, the cyclists are really a challenge to deal with on the Camino. I know they're on their own journey. It just, sometimes it feels so invasive of any sort of peace that you're looking for. And they use Buen Camino almost as a sharp elbow to get you out of the way. Buen Camino. You're like, oh, okay.
Wow. Like a sharp elbow. That's a good way to put it. There's a safety issue too. When you're walking with a backpack and
bikers on e-bikes. Talk about another super. It's like, okay, because when you are in a mechanical bike or whatever, like a traditional bike, you don't fly through certain terrains or
At high speeds. Yeah.
high speeds on those e-bikes. Yeah, that was challenging.
I think what we all wish is that they would not be on the trail itself, that there would be some sort of norm that says, yeah, there's someplace else. But in the meantime, I think about the only thing we can do is maybe just not wear earbuds or AirPods. So you can hear. The sense of hearing is so important when you've got bikes around you and you've got car traffic around you.
Mm-hmm.
Big safety issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had an interesting experience, and I can't remember what town we were going into. Maybe you'll remember, Andrea, but it was like a small village, meaning just a couple of houses and a barn. And we turned the corner and there was a string just from one rock wall that looped over to this building. And we're like, what? We all were kind of backing up and stopping and waiting. It was like, what is this string all about? And all of a sudden this old lady starts to shush these cows out of this barn. And it was a parade of cattle that were going down the Camino about 100 yards to the field to graze for the day. And it had been raining, it was muddy. And then we ended up, because we'd been waiting for about 15 minutes for these cows to get out of the barn. Then she pulled the string down. We walked behind these cows and they just kept crapping. And we couldn't tell what was mud and what was cow crap. And and we're like, wow, we are really in it. And
you're in it.
when we got to the town, the woman who was at the albergue, she was standing next to an outdoor slop sink with a hose and big brushes. I was like, you know exactly what to expect when.
Where we're coming from. That was right before Villa Franca del Bierzo.
Okay.
Very muddy. No, I think we covered a lot. Those were really the highlights,
Highlights and lowlights.
I
Yeah.
went to the thing about back to the souvenir tote bag I got that said I went looking for answers and the Camino changed my questions. For me, one of such questions that got shifted was the idea of like the purpose of life or my purpose as a individually in this life, and the legacy I want to leave behind, or the meaning, or that I want to focus on for my existence in this in this lifetime.
That's a really big question.
Big question. And I was like, I really hoped that I would come back with more insight into that, with more clarity around that, with more inspiration to guide me forward. And the inspiration and guidance I got came from the snails, from the cows, from the birds and butterflies, and from the trees, from the sun rising every morning and setting at night, and the rain and the heat of the day. And it's just like, I feel like I don't need that meaning anymore, or that the search for that purpose has been at least put to rest for a little while. And I just really feel very lucky to open my eyes and have the opportunity for another day. Whatever the day brings, it's kind of like, wow, that's magical enough, isn't it? It's a miracle.
Wow.
And to be so close to the cycles of nature and observing it directly without any filter, and my body being a part of that.
What a privilege.
Yeah.
I love that. All right. Last question. How did it feel to walk into Santiago de Compostela?
So I'll say, first of all, we had a very rainy morning. So we did push in the last 5 days. So from like Sarria to Santiago, we pushed ourselves over 25, close to 30 kilometers for 4 days, so that the last day leading into Santiago was a short 5-hour walk. And that 5-hour walk was under torrential rain, pretty much nonstop. When it was awful. And you cross a significant amount of suburbs before you get to the plaza, right? And as we are approaching the plaza and the famous arch that you go under, the sun came out. I kid you not. It was biblical. The clouds dissipated, sunshine on us, and then the bagpipes started to play, and it was noon on the dot. So the church bells started, ringing full speed. It felt, no kidding, like a biblical moment to walk into that plaza.
The only thing missing was a chorus singing the Alleluia chorus.
It really was.
Do you want to sing that now?
I have it in my head, just screaming.
We just dropped our backpacks and sat down on the floor, on the ground, watching the cathedral. And I was most grateful for Jason. Like, what overwhelmed me was his companionship and his love. And just like, wow, we did it.
You did it together.
We did it together.
Now let's get these shoes off and into a burn pile somewhere.
Yeah. And where's the spa?
That's right.
Yeah.
When we went to get our Compostela and register that we had finished this, it was very quick. I was so glad. It was a Sunday. It was noon, and we walked in and walked right up to a person, and they're like, "Here you go." And we're like, "Oh, that's it." It was really quick.
They've automated it. So did you register before you got to the office?
We knew the night before from our host at the albergue, and it didn't really seem to matter because we just walked right in without anybody in front of us. But
great.
Yeah, that's good to know that you do. It's good to register before you get there.
Yes. And then because it's printed by a printer instead of a human now, they've got it in the queue. So as soon as you arrive and say, I'm here, they've got it. They print the print button and you're done. It's very efficient. They used to handwrite your name in, which was very, very sweet as well. But
Yeah.
cool. All right. Well, last call. Anything else you'd like to say?
It's a big thanks to you.
Yes, a
You know, I
huge
said
thank
it
you.
before, I'll say it again. Meeting you was a great highlight of the Camino experience, and your support and guidance information just absolutely was a huge part of how we experienced this, and very helpful.
It was my pleasure.
Keep doing what you're doing, like just really providing a great service to the pilgrims.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. I
All
really
the best. Come
appreciate that.
visit us in the Berkshire sometime.
I'd love to.
Okay.
Love to.
And thanks for listening to us, you know, recounting our story.
I love it. I think my listeners will want to hear it as well.
Yeah, we hope so, because that was what it was important aspect that I think we weren't quite getting before we left. And without being a downer, we wanted to just be realistic about sharing.
Yeah. It's a pilgrimage. It's not a beach holiday.
No.
And by the way, it's more than 30 days long. I get,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of people could go walk for 8 hours today, but could you do it for 30 days? That's a whole different, that's something completely different.
It is. It is.
So when you start to train for it, you first have to ask the question, what am I training for?
Mm-hmm.
What am I packing for? What am I preparing for? And in many cases, we won't know until we get there. That's part of the journey. So honestly, no matter how much you plan and prepare, you're still going on the mystery tour.
You're discovering a lot of new information every day about yourself, about the environment you're in. Yeah.
And you don't want to hear that going out, because you had said that in some other podcasts. You can only do so much preparing, and then you just have to go. And I was like, okay, well, that doesn't help me. I still really need to know, is it, what kind of socks?
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, so try a few and go walk. It took me a decade to get my shoes right.
Yeah.
My feet always hurt. So that's part of the Camino.
Yep.
Yes.
Exactly.
You can't avoid that. Yeah.
That's what we got.
That's right. Well, thank you, Nancy.
It was lovely seeing you, talking to you. Take care.
Likewise.
Be in touch, okay?
Okay. You too.
Bye.
Bye.